In the meantime, the biggest story yesterday in our backyard came in Jackson County, Missouri, where a judge ruled against Jackson County over these awful property assessments dating back to 2023. The judge sided with the state tax commission, stating that it acted lawfully in August of last year when it ordered that the increases from 2023 should be capped at 15%. Now, you had residents in this community who dealt with tax assessment increases of 30, 40, 50, in some cases 80, 90%. And, of course, it was a total debacle for the county. And now a judge has sided with the state tax commission saying, hey, these things have to be capped at 15%. Sean Smith is here. He is on KCMO Talk Radio. He is a Jackson County legislator. And, Sean, I just want to get your initial reaction to what the judge did yesterday.
Yeah, so, Pete, this really felt like a tremendous victory for our taxpayers and, frankly, all of our residents, even people who rent. Their property taxes are built into the rent they pay. Yeah. So this affects every single resident in Jackson County, and it really has been a 2-year-long battle that, frankly, even started before that, going all the way back to 2019. And the reality is that it's been done improperly. Everybody knows it was done improperly. There's a few top-level people at the county, like Frank White and Gail McCann-Beatty and Brian Kavinsky, our county counselor, who continue to try to paint something that's so clearly a turd pile as though it's going to become somehow a gleaming gem. And it's just not. It's time to start working on fixing this instead of trying to deny that nothing happened that was wrong.
So the first question here then is residents and homeowners are seeing this and they're saying, so am I getting a property tax refund, a rebate? Like, what happens here now?
Yeah, so there's still a little bit of ways to go, right? My suspicion is that we'll take legislative action to tell the county councilors and lawyers not to appeal. I think they'll probably appeal anyway. And that appeal will go straight to the Missouri Supreme Court, I think. They will make a fast decision, and then it will be about enforcement. There's legislation being passed right now in the Missouri legislature that will allow the state tax commission to withhold tens of millions of dollars of payments they send Jackson County every single month. So there's people taking action at the state level to make sure that this order is enforceable. When are people going to see relief? My hope is that on your next tax bill, at the end of this calendar year, we'll be able to give you a portion of your money back. We collect this money. We distribute it to cities and school districts. We don't have a pile of cash sitting around, but the reality is we need to compensate the people who were overcharged to the tune of almost $250 million is how much we overcharged people. It's crazy.
Now, $250 million, that's in county, or is that also city level?
That's everything combined that we collect. Between 23 and 24, the calculations were that it was about $115 million in 2023, and you double that number for 2024 because we use the same numbers, basically.
So what do you do then? I mean, these cities obviously set their mill levy rates at numbers based on those 2023 assessments, and they're going to scream about how we can't fund the cops, the fire departments now. What are we going to do? We can't be giving money back. We don't have any money to give back. So how does that factor into the equation?
Yeah, so cities and jurisdictions like school districts have the opportunity to do what they call a recoupment levy. This happens all the time. It just doesn't happen at this scale. When people appeal and they get their value lowered, that basically takes a little bit of money away from the schools, say. And the reality is this is just a lot more at once because of the catastrophic errors that this administration created that we now have to correct. That correction will come in the form of, I hope, credits to taxpayers on their future bills, and then those entities, the cities and school districts, being able to do small recoupment levies so that over time they make this up. This is why we hold cash reserves. We don't hope to use it because of problems like this, but the reality is most responsible entities are sitting on some level of cash reserves. This isn't some massive catastrophe for those entities that tax you. What it has been is a catastrophe for a lot of homeowners. I got an email just yesterday, somebody that's drained their savings, a retired gentleman, and he's still waiting on his appeal hearing. And that's the kind of damage that Frank White and Gail McCann-Beatty are doing to this community. People that are looking to have to sell their homes or be evicted because they can't afford these increases that were unlawful.
Sean Smith, Jackson County legislator, is here on KCMO. You want to see Frank and Gail resign?
I did. I publicly, for the first time ever, called for their resignation yesterday. They have put the county in such a huge hole, and this is going to take, I think, years to unravel, not only in the form of future credits to people, but also think about the renters. The renters, they're not going to see a refund back from their landlords, but I think they have a class action suit against the county. I mean, the ripple effect of what this impacts is just going to be a massive, massive drain on county resources for a long, long time. And they're the ones that are clearly responsible early in this process. Not long after those assessment notices went out and we started to hear from our constituents, the legislature unanimously told Frank White to correct this. It could have been corrected then at virtually no cost. And instead, they just stuck to their guns. They dug their heels in, and now they've created something that looks like it could be financially very, very damaging for the county. And we need to hold those people that did that accountable.
Is there anything to suggest either will take your advice and hit the road?
You know, I will say that I've heard through the grapevine that Gail has tried to resign a couple of times, and Frank has asked her to stay on. I don't know what that's all about. I've got to believe this has been very stressful for her, and I don't think she had evil intentions here. I think she set out to try to correct something that she thought had been done improperly for a long time, and when that was going to fail, it's really hard to admit when you've worked for years to fix something that the fix isn't ready yet, but it just wasn't ready yet in 2023, and they tried to drive through that, and now they've created this catastrophe.
Well, if that's true, then it sounds to me like Frank White has basically used her as a shield in this entire process.
I think that's a fair assessment, and Frank, as you see, doesn't show up to meetings, doesn't participate in very many media events. I've only seen him once, and that was at a Raytown Chamber of Commerce luncheon where they happened to seat us together. That's the only time I've seen him this calendar year.
What'd you say to him?
I just said hello. I try not to bring what I would like to be some pretty angry reactions out in the public. The reality is I try to stay constructive because who knows? Maybe he decides to become part of the fix, and I don't want to burn any bridges.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath. Sean Smith, Jackson County Legislator on KCMO. So I guess the hope here, too, is that the school districts and the cities have been responsible, knowing that this has been going through a legal process and that this was always possible, that the judges, in this case, or a judge, would side with the state tax commission and say, hey, you got to cap these property assessments from 2 years ago at 15%. You hope that they have been responsible?
Yeah, I know many have. They rolled back their levy rate, which then gives them the opportunity to do that recoupment levy. I know that in the case of the Kansas City Public Schools, they were advised by their former treasurer and my colleague, Manny Abarca, to roll back the levy rate to try to mitigate some of the damage, and they chose not to. They left their levy rate set at kind of a maximum level that their voter approved for, is my understanding. So the circumstances will vary. And what I really worry about, we've got all these bond issues. Some of them are sales tax based. The Kansas City Public Safety Bond Initiative, that's based on a sales tax. No impact here. But in the case of the Kansas City Public Schools or other public schools that are sending out elections, having elections for bond issuance, they could really be hindering their ability to repay if this rollback happens and they're forced to repay sooner as opposed to later. If it happens over a period of years, I'm sure many responsible districts can manage that. But the reality is, if you do a bond issuance and then you don't have the money to pay, your only option is to go to the voters and say, in order to remain solvent, we've got to raise your taxes. So I'd just like people to consider that as they decide whether they want to pass a bond issue in this environment right now.
That's a great point. Now, 2025 assessments, this is done every other year in Jackson County. Are those already happening?
Yeah, so the work for the 2025 assessments, that's your value of your home as of January 1st, 2025. So that work has really been completed, but it hasn't been mailed to people yet. The adjustments that are needed to that are significant because of this ruling. They should be right away, and I've got legislation teed up for this in anticipation of this ruling. Our assessment department right now should be making sure that no 2025 assessment notice goes out with anything more than a 15% increase over the new, what should be adjusted value after this ruling. And this has ripple effects also for our seniors that applied for the senior tax freeze. A lot of them had massive increases. They should now be frozen at this new lower level. So this is a huge ruling, and it's very impactful for a lot of people, especially those on fixed incomes.
It's a mess because how are you going to do an assessment for 25 based on perceived value on January 1 when now those numbers have basically been thrown out?
Right. It's really a math equation at this point in order to not violate the law. That's
Wow.
what it comes down to. We can do the math. The math is easy. And in rare circumstances where maybe during the last year or so when we were trying to determine new values, we might have identified some properties that were really egregiously undervalued and really gone out and done the work properly. For that handful of properties where that happened, and I've shown our assessor examples of those, I mean, I'm talking about $1 million home that's lakefront in Lakewood, whose value went down from $800,000 in 22 down to $200,000 in 23. Like there's circumstances where the errors went the other way and people's values were lowered. Correcting those, I'm all for, with the proper procedures, which means the proper inspection, the proper notice, the proper opportunity to appeal. We need to fix those. But the reality is that for the majority of properties where we didn't go inspect them over the last few months, those properties should be rolled back to no more than a 15% increase.
Didn't you guys retain that same crappy company down in Texas?
So there's a company called Tyler Technologies.
Yeah.
So what I would tell you about Tyler is that their software is a database to store information, let people input information about their appeals. That seems to work fine. Its ability to predict values of homes in an environment as complex and diverse as Jackson County, where we have $30,000 houses on tiny little lots east of Troost, and then we have agricultural land, and we have everything in between, condominiums and high rises. It's a massively complex problem here in Jackson County. Really what we need is broader property tax reform that just eliminates the need to guess at a value. We should never tax people on unrealized gains, which when we increase the value of your home and therefore your taxes because your neighbor remodeled and it made your house look more valuable in market comparable sales, that's ridiculous. If your home's the same, it should more or less stay the same with taxes with maybe a little inflationary adjustment. It shouldn't be this guess from a county assessor. Our county is a great example of why this system is just really defective and it needs to be overhauled.
Okay, last thing in the next minute, recalling Frank White. I know that's still on the table. What do people need to do?
Yeah, so there's a group scheduling kind of I'll call it a rally for Monday. Our next legislative meeting will be in Independence, so you don't have to pay to park downtown Kansas City. And at the Independence Courthouse, not the historic courthouse, but the actual place where we do trials these days, people showing up out there can sign the recall petition. They can volunteer to help. There's people that are getting organized to be out on Election Day. We're trying to hit every single polling location for this April 8th election and collect the final little group of signatures that we need.
How many do you need?
You know, the number's really hard to pin down because they get turned in every single day. So I would say that we're about 80% of the way there. We may be even 100% of the way there. It just depends on how many get certified. But what I would say is we don't want to be a few short.
Yeah.
We want to blow past that number and send a clear message to this administration and to the next administration. You're accountable to people.
So what time on Monday?
That's going to be at 2:30 on Monday.
Okay. All right, 2:30 on Monday. Sean Smith, a Jackson County legislator. Thanks for coming in. First time in the studios. Appreciate you being here, man.
The palace that Pete built. I'm glad to be here.
What do you think of that, Mark? You like the sound of that?
That's nice.
That is nice. That is real nice. Hey, great job, man. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Pete.